Welcome to the film analysis, today with M by Fritz Lang. Let's forget the current crime films and true crime podcasts and rather focus on a masterpiece, on one of the most interesting crime films ever, on M from 1931. Fritz Lang's first film featuring sound. As a prominent silent film director, he embarked late on the journey with M, but he wanted to show right away why one includes sound at all. Isn't it enough for a film to remain silent? At the beginning of the film, we don't see anything. We just hear a loud gong, we hear children singing a rhyme about a murderer, a mother admonishes these children in a Berlin backyard to stop singing this awful song. Another mother reassures them, as you hear the children singing, you still know they are there. So the voice stands for the presence of the children. A brilliant opening by Fritz Lang. Throughout M, Lang plays with sound. There is no music, no score. We only hear a large sound collage. Big city symphonies consisting of cars honking, trams roaring past, newspaper boys shouting. Lang gathers the urban life. We hear the theme in the Hall of the Mountain King from Edvard Grieg's Peer Gynt Suite No. 1, a melody whistled by the murderer. The signature tune will finally convict him. Who qualifies for convicting someone recognizable by whistling? A blind man, a blind beggar in this case. M also plays with sound illogically. We hear intradiegetic sounds. Nothing comes from outside. Lang abstains from film music or off-screen sounds. Everything inside the film's world produces the sounds. Once, however, we witness subjective perception. A barrel organ begins to play and the beggar keeps his ears open and closed accordingly. The audience experiences what the beggar hears or doesn't hear, illustrating we are watching a film here pulled out of the experience a bit. M also features an amusing sound issue because the murderer's landlady is hard of hearing. Lang's masterpiece resembles a sponge absorbing everything happening in the big city, referring to discourses and art of the time as M imitates Bauhaus photography, for example. Elsie falls victim to the murderer. Her place at the table is empty and slightly observant, an orphaned place, reminding us of Bauhaus. Or the underside view of a telegraph pole. This too could be a Bauhaus photograph symbolizing modern mass communication. M's main issue, the mass media and its correspondence with the murderer. The latter turns into a publicist by sending a letter to the newspaper printing it. Lang dives into media's effect on the crowds, into paranoia. Suddenly, through this coverage of the serial killer, a culture of suspicion prevails. Anyone sitting next to you could be the killer. Modern policing reacts. It's all about measuring people, about collecting circumstantial evidence and data. Let's call it big data. It may be analog in M, but proves to be easily transferable to the digital. Every trace, even the smallest, must be recorded. A crumpled bag of sweets. The police must know where it was bought and extends the search area further and further after the first 2 kilometers. That's modern tracking. Our smartphones send out data all the time. Fritz Lang gallantly anticipates modern discourse ahead of his time. The mayor and the police chief discuss the investigation. Lang superimposes this dialogue on the images and shows scenes of a raid, the police searching a homeless shelter or interrogating witnesses. These are the mosaic stones of the modern world. To piece these stones together, you must assemble individual scenes. One is looking for a recurrent theme, linearity leading to the murderer, not a dialectical principle of montage emphasizing the opposites, but a unity. every single lead is supposed to lead to the murderer. This becomes clearest in one of the most famous parallel montages in film history. The criminals and the police meet each other on their own, planning further steps. The criminals maintain a private interest in catching the murderer as they finally intend to return to their business or, as they say, their professions. They desire to operate undisturbed without being constantly searched by the police. The criminals must come up with something. In the montage, the crook Schrenker, played by Gustaf Gründgens, starts a sentence, a policeman continues his sentence, and vice versa. A criminal finishes a policeman's sentence. One has a common goal, after all. Lang illustrates the special closeness of the police to crime. The police, too, tend to be crossing boundaries, violating laws, as for example the classic of the 70s, French Connection, taught us. In M, Inspector Lohmann walks a fine line when he scares a poor guy, blackmails him into explaining what's going on. Another component of Unity matters as well. A kind of community establishes itself, as a raid on quite the dubious pub illustrates. The barmaid says they won't find anyone here, stressing the decency of these people. Every prostitute was a mother, every criminal a father. Evil is out there, not here with us. A fundamental defensive movement common in society and in media. Evil is outside, it has nothing to do with us. An externalization of evil, creating a scapegoat, allowing for society's transformation into a community. The criminals want their usual business. Schrenker supposes an outsider to spoil society. The criminals hold their meeting stating, "This beast has no right to exist, it must be exterminated." A more than delicate rhetoric. The criminals decide to monitor every square meter, without today's technology though, but using human surveillance cameras, unsuspicious beggars. We have become so accustomed to the sight of them in the city, being positioned all over the place. They constitute quite the modern bureaucratic society, collecting, cataloging, sorting cigars and sandwiches. The beggars must identify themselves, so to speak, register in lists reminiscent of a modern citizenship. The individual here is always subjected to being called by the state apparatus and thinks, yes, it is me who is meant. Fritz Lang repeatedly called M a documentary film. That is true. Take other documentaries from the time, Symphony of a Great City by Walter Rothman, or Man with a Movie Camera by Sieger Wörthoff. These films collect urban life by showing individual scenes, cleverly montaging them together, exactly what Lang does. At the same time, he adds a crime story. The film reveals the murderer quite late. Peter Lorre plays the child murderer Hans Beckert furiously. He remains invisible to us for a long time. The audience investigates along with the protagonists. Motion picture remains first and foremost a visual medium, and sounds don't change that. Visibility belongs to M's main themes as well. How does a murderer looking like oneself become visible? He becomes visible as a criminal recognizes him, approaches and presses a chalk mark on his coat, namely M. Everyone else now knows. We already considered the scapegoat mechanism. Yes, the man is a child murderer, but an allegorical level is advised. Due to said chalk mark, a scapegoat is given a sign recognizable to everyone, the Jewish star avant la lettre. We must pause for a moment. Not only film historians or fans praise M, but also Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Seen M in the evening with Magda. Fabulous. Against humanitarianism, for the death penalty. Well done. Lang will be our director one day." Fritz Lang did not become Goebbels' director. Fritz Lang went to America, but Goebbels was relatively good at analyzing films, knew about this underlying message, the texture of a film, its expression. In fact, something peculiar happens in this film. A community is constituted. Throughout M, this mirage of a good German people emerges, not only evident in the mentioned bar scene, but in general, as the criminals always see themselves as good, upright citizens. The crowds need a scapegoat here, and everyone pulls together to catch him. Crowds and power matter. Crowds and power, as Elias Canetti's outstanding essay is called. He writes, "The baiting crowd forms with reference to a quickly attainable goal. The goal is known and clearly marked, and is also near. This crowd is out for killing, and it knows whom it wants to kill. It heads for this goal with unique determination and cannot be cheated of it. The proclaiming of the goal, the spreading about of who it is that is to perish, is enough to make the crowd form. This concentration on killing is of a special kind and of an unsurpassed intensity. Everyone wants to participate, everyone strikes a blow. The victim can do nothing to them. He is either bound or in flight and cannot hit back. In his defenselessness, he is victim only." End of quote. Credit is due for M clearly depicting this defenselessness, for triggering something in us when the criminals finally catch the killer and deal with him in a supposed court. Elias Canetti's term discharge addresses this notion. Quote, "The most important occurrence within the crowd is the discharge. Before this, the crowd does not actually exist. It is the discharge which creates it. This is the moment when all who belong to the crowd get rid of their differences and feel equal." End of quote. Exactly what happens to all the criminals sitting in the mock court, regardless of whether they belong to the red light milieu, whether they are really a murderer. It doesn't matter. Now they become one. We, as the audience, ally ourselves with these criminals. Before the show trial, however, M is different, with unity yet to be established. This seductive image of a people hasn't emerged yet. For quite some time, the film upholds a distanced view, as if assembled from documentary material, as if hundreds of surveillance cameras from the city had provided material and someone was sitting at the editing table and tinkering. The beggars resemble surveillance cameras, a mechanistic touch. Fritz Lang refuses empathy. There is no need for sympathy steering anyway, as we are concerned with several child murders after all. When the show trial starts, the position and camera angle change. The camera moves closer. It focuses on the murderer Hans Beckert, not leading to a dramaturgy of pity, however. A new analytical discourse unfolds. The sound film lets people talk, which is what psychoanalysis wants. People lie on the couch and confess. Only the sound film allows for that. You could fade in some text in a silent film, but in M, the murderer speaks. The creators have obviously received Sigmund Freud. Psychoanalysis needs the sound film. We hear the murderer say, "I can't help it." Interestingly, he continues, "Don't want to, must. Don't want to, must." That is Sigmund Freud. The ego is terrorized by the id, by the drives and the corresponding superego. A voice tells him to murder the children. The criminal head concludes, this man must be exterminated, he's pure evil, he must be destroyed. He cannot be treated in a hospital but must be exterminated. Hence Goebbels' sympathy. But is this the whole truth? The murderer's lawyer emphasizes the Freudian interpretation because Beckert could not help it, he is not guilty. Then the tabloid argument follows. The emotionalization by a woman in the audience saying that all mothers would also show no mercy. Here compassion turns into vigilante justice, into barbarism, rendering us, the audience, as judges. We can't pass judgment, but we make up our own. The film engages with the audience once more. How does M affect us? Peter Lorre playing this murderer. We are supposed to reflect on the film, particularly evident when the sound film is reflected upon as a sound film. This form of self-reflection is not a gimmick. The audience must thus reflect on its perception of the film, whether it was seduced or not. It seems questionable whether Lang would really have made a career in the so-called Third Reich. At the very least, he would have had to make differing films. The propaganda films in the Third Reich did not question themselves protecting the Nazi propaganda. In M, however, the self-reflection of the medium protects the audience from itself, protects the audience from ideology so that we don't watch but see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.